Hello and welcome to our 9th lecture on Java programming for beginners. In today's lecture we will be addressing program execution flow, and we would see exactly from where our Java programs usually start and from where they terminate. From your previous programming experience, you would know that program execution is usually sequential from the beginning of the file right down to the end of the file. However, you have different structures that you could use to modify the flow or to alter the flow of your program, the execution of your program. You could use a for loop, you could use if-else statements, you could also use functions, and you call these functions at different times. Now, Java also provides different structures for controlling program execution, and that's what we will be looking at. But for this lesson, we will focus on method calls, and we'll leave the other stuff for later videos. Now, with that said, we have a chart before us, and on this chart I have three basic components. First of all, I have a portion here to the left that has a class. We also have a stack diagram here that we will be using for our explanations, and down here we have the output of our program. So let's see what this program does. First, we have our class, public class demonstrator, that begins from this curly brace and ends right down here at the closing curly brace we have at the bottom of the page here. And we have a constructor. Now you would see that this has the structure of the default constructor, but it's different because I have added something inside here. So I'm replacing the default constructor with a constructor that prints out a single line. Now be careful, I'm not overriding the constructor, I'm replacing the constructor. Don't use the word override with constructors. Constructors in Java are not overridden, and we'll talk about that shortly too, but I'm insisting on it now so that you keep it in your head. Never use the word override on a constructor. We're going to use that with methods, not with constructors. Okay, with that said, I have my constructor here that prints out in the constructor, and I also have some other methods. I have a method here, go there. I have a method here that says go further, and I have my main method, which is where Java execution will start. Remember, we said earlier that every time your Java program starts, the Java virtual machine looks for a main method, and that is where execution will start. So with that said, let's start our program. Assuming we have compiled and we are running this program now, what's going to happen? The Java virtual machine is going to scan our program, and it's going to see that this is where it's supposed to start, from the main method, and it's going to get into the opening curly brace of the main method. Once it's in the body of the main method, it's going to start executing the lines one after the other. Like every other programming languages, it's going to execute line by line, but that is done in the main method, and we're going to go to other parts of the program from the main method. So let's start our execution. In the main method, we start by this line that says system.out.println, and it prints in main. So the first thing that will be printed out on the console is this line that we have here in blue, in main. And after that, we call the constructor. Now remember, in our previous video, I said every time you create a class in your program, you're declaring or you're creating a new data type. So in this case, we have added a new data type in addition to the primitive data types like string integers, like strings, integers, floats, and so on. Our program now has a new data type, demonstrator, and this is an object reference data type, which we saw as well in the previous video on when we talked about constructors and object references. So what are we doing here? We are declaring a variable d of type demonstrator, and at this point Java will reserve memory for us to store data of type demonstrator. And after that, what happens? After declaring a variable of type demonstrator, we instantiate a demonstrator object by calling the constructor. Look at the constructor public demonstrator. That's what we are doing here. We're using the new operator on the constructor, and we create an object in memory, and the address of where that object is kept in memory is stored in the variable d, which was declared of type constructor. Remember, Java is a very strongly typed language. And everything that you put in a variable must be of the type the variable is declared to be. So in this case, we cannot put an integer inside d because d is of type demonstrator. So only a demonstrator object can be stored inside d. Now that we have our object created in memory and the address stored in d, let's go ahead. At this point, first of all, when we say new demonstrator, we are calling the constructor. So execution is at this line demonstrator d, and immediately we call new demonstrator, we are calling the constructor. So execution jumps up to the constructor here and it starts executing the constructor, and the constructor brings system.out.println and it brings in the constructor, and we now have this second line printed on the console here. And after that, execution continues in the constructor sequentially till it meets this closing curly brace for the constructor. Immediately this closing curly brace is hit, execution is returned to the main method which called the constructor, and execution continues sequentially from there. It meets this empty line, and then it continues from there till we get to this point where it's using the reference variable that we created, d, to call the go there method on the object that is created here. So we call the go there method. At this point, we say main is calling go there. So main is the caller, or the caller method. Main is the caller method, while go there is the called method. So at this point where main calls go there, it passes execution over to go there. Now when execution is handed over to go there, the body of go there starts executing, and immediately you get into the body of go there, we see another method, go further. Now this is a method call, and once we call this method go further, what happens? Execution leaves from here. Remember, we are still in main. Main has called this guy go there has not finished yet, so main 2 has not finished. Go there has called another guy, and the guy is go further. So what happens? Go further starts executing. Like from here we have go there is calling go further, so it's directing control execution. It's directing execution to go further. So at this point our code jumps into the go further method, and the body of go further starts executing. And what happens here? It hits this line system.out.println, and what happens? It prints far away, and far away is printed on the console, and then it continues execution sequentially until it meets the closing curly brace for go further. After it meets the closing curly brace, this method finishes, and then it returns control back to the caller, which was go there. Go there now continues execution from there sequentially, and it now hits this line and prints system.out.println, and it prints there on the console. After that, it continues sequentially until it hits this closing curly brace, and that is the end of go there. And since go there is finished, it now returns control back to main, which called it initially. Now main continues executing sequentially from there, and it executes this line. It prints back in main, and then it executes the last line. Main is complete, and after that it hits the closing curly brace, and the program terminates. So you see that your program always starts from the main method, and then it ends immediately after the last curly brace for the main method is hit. Now let's try to look at that using this stack diagram that I have here. What happens? Our program started in main. So what goes on there? Main is in the stack. Main is the current method executing. It starts executing. System.out.println in main. It calls the constructor and constructs an object in memory, and then down here it calls go there. So go there jumps into the stack. You will see that main is at the bottom of the stack, so it cannot come out. Go there is placed on top of main. Now main cannot come out. It's a stack, so once something is on top of you, you must wait for that thing to get off before you too can get out. So main has to remain down here until go there gets off the stack. But now execution comes to go there, and what happens? Go there starts executing, and when you get into the body of go further, when you get into the body of go there, there's another method called go further. Go there is calling another method, go further. So while main is at the bottom of the stack, go there has been called on top of main, and now another method, go further, has been called on top of go there. So go further is at the top of the stack. Now main cannot come out, go there cannot come out until go further comes out of the stack. Before go there will follow, and then main will follow. So let's see how that happens. Now go further is on top of the stack. So we get into the body of go further and we start executing. We see system.out.println go further, and now what happens? Go further executes. It finishes all the statements inside. In this case we have just one statement, and then it hits the closing curly brace. After hitting this closing curly brace, what happens? Wait, at this line, first of all, you see what it prints, far away, and then it hits the closing curly brace. After it hits the closing curly brace, it's done, it's finished. So it jumps out of the stack, it's popped off the stack, and it returns control to go there. Now we have two methods left in the stack, go there and main. Now go there continuous execution. It brings system.out.println. We have this message down here, there, and then after that it realizes that's the last statement, and it hits the curly brace, the closing curly brace for the method go there. Once the closing curly brace for the method go there is hit, go there terminates, and it's popped off the stack, and execution is returned to main, which initially called go there. Now main continuous execution back in main. It brings that on the console, and then it continues sequentially until it hits this other statement, system.out.println, and it prints main complete, and then it prints the last message, and it continues. It hits the curly brace here, and you see that execution stops. That's the last thing that we printed. So if we had any other statements down here in our example, we'll actually put some statements down here, and you see nothing happens to them because main is not calling them. So you see at every given point our program starts from the main method at the beginning of the main method and ends immediately when it hits the closing curly brace. Now there are many other things to add to program execution flow, but we're not going to talk about that now. We are going to talk about that after we talk about packages and the import statement, and we look at the static keyword. Then we will come back and discuss all of that, and when we talk about inheritance as well, we will also have a lot to discuss about that with respect to program execution flow. But for now, I want you to look at the method call stack and understand that very well, so you can go back and play the video over and over again. Play this part before you get to the practical part, which we'll be doing immediately after this. But before we actually write the code. There's one thing I want to mention here. I'm not sure I mentioned that detailedly in the previous video. You would see here, normally we do method calls like I mentioned before by calling the name of the method and then using the parentheses. If the method took any arguments, then we'll have to pass in values for those arguments. But in this case, our go further method is not taking any arguments, so we call the method by using its name, go further, and we use the set of parentheses and we end that with a semicolon, and it calls this method. That's the way you call a method. But you will see inside the static method here, inside the main method, we don't call go there directly. Instead, we create an instance of the class and then we call go there. Are you seeing that? You cannot call go there directly. Why? This is a static class member. Actually, when we look at the static class, when we look at the static keyword, we would learn there that static, when you declare a method or an instance variable, anything, when you declare something as static, it does not belong to any particular object. Instead, it is shared by all the objects that you create for this class. For example, I could create a variable demonstrator D1 is equal to new demonstrator, and I could create another one, demonstrator D2 is equal to new demonstrator. Those are two different objects that I will be creating from my demonstrator class, and once I do that, they will have all of these methods separate to them, but this one, the static method, will always be shared. Well, that might sound a little confusing right now, but like I said, we're going to see that in detail when we talk about the static keyword. But for now, what I want you to know, I'm doing this here because there is a rule which states that static class members cannot access non-static class members without using an instance of the class, without first of all creating an object. That's why you see that I had to create an object here before I could call go there, because main is static. If I wanted to call go further inside here, then I would have been obliged to use the object. But since I'm calling it inside go there is not static and go further is not static. Go there can correctly call go further without needing an instance of the class, because at every given point, this and this will belong to a particular object. This one is shared among all the objects of this class, and we'll see that later on. And that is the concept. That's actually, because to call a static member of a class like main, you actually don't need an instance of the class. And that we will see later on that is how the Java virtual machine is actually able to start our program without first of all creating an object, without first of all calling new. We're going to see that later on. But just know that here we are using D, we're using a reference variable of type demonstrator to call the go there method, because main is static and main cannot directly access any of these members which are not static. So with all of that said, let's go and write some code and actually see what happens. So I'm going to bring up my NetBeans and I'm going to right click here and I'll create a new class and I'll call it demonstrator. And I'll just click finish. Let me pull this down a little so I have more typing space. And inside my demonstrator class, I'm going to put public void go there, which is what we saw earlier. And here I'm going to put system.out.println, and I'll say there. That will be the end of the method, and I'll do public void go further, and I'll say system.out.println, println. Actually, what println does is it prints the string that you pass into it, and after printing the string, it prints a new line so that the cursor is moved and the next string to be printed will be printed on a brand new line instead of printing all on the same line. You could also use print instead of println. You could use print, that will print the string and then the cursor will remain on the same line so that when you print again it continues flowing on the same line. We'll definitely use that as we go along the way. So here I would say far away, away. Okay, that will be it, and I'll go to my Java tutorials class. This is what we put there last time. You could comment this out or you could take it out completely, and I'm taking mine out completely. You could comment it if you want to come back and see. Maybe you want to go back to the previous videos, or you could take it out and type it out again. Practice simply makes you better. So what I'm going to do here is, now I'm going to create an object, I'll declare a variable of type demonstrator. Like I said, every time you create a class, you're creating a new data type. So I'll say demonstrator d is equal to new demonstrator. That spelling, it's not correct. Just press, I'll type DE and I'll use Control space bar so that it helps me. Good when you use an IDE. Okay, now that I have that, first of all, I'll say system.out.println, and I'll say in main, and once I'm in main, now I declare my constructor. Okay, let me add the constructor first inside my demonstrator class. Don't worry about this. This is a package in which our demonstrator class is found. We'll talk about packages and imports shortly. So I say public demonstrator. I'm creating a constructor and I'm just going to put a single statement inside, system.out.println, and I say in the constructor. Good. So I'll go back here I'll close the person class that we had earlier, and down here I would say d.go there, and then I'll say system.out.println back in main, and system.out.println main is complete. Okay, just to demonstrate something that I mentioned earlier, I'm going to write a method here, public void non-static method, and I'm going to put system.out.println. This is a non-static method. Now, to demonstrate what I told you about non-static class members static class members cannot access non-static members without first of all creating an instance of the class, without creating an object. You're going to see that happening here. I'll try to do I said non-static, not static. I'll say non-static method. And you see, I have an error. Look at what the error message says. Non-static method cannot be referenced by a static context. This method is static and it cannot call another method that is not static. if I wanted to solve this problem, I could also make this one static, and the problem is going to be addressed. Like I said, we'll talk about the static keyword later. Or I could create an object, new in this case is new Java tutorials dot. Now in this case, I'm creating the object, but I'm not storing it in a variable. I'm using it directly to call this method, non-static method. So you see, this is equal to doing something like this. Java, well, let me write another line here. Java tutorials JT is equal to new Java tutorials, and then I say JT dot non-static method. So you see, these two lines, this line here actually does the same thing like this two line. In this case, in this second case, I create a variable, I create the object, I store the reference to the object in a variable, and I use it to call the method. In this case, I create the object and I don't store it, I use it directly to call the method. So these two actually do the same thing. But I'm going to take this out because I just wanted to demonstrate the fact that a non-static method, a static method cannot call a non-static member without using an instance of the class. So if I take this off again to demonstrate that, you will see that I have the error message. Non-static method cannot be referenced from a static context. So if you want to do that, you must use an object. We'll see why when we talk about the static keyword in detail. Okay, with that said, I have my program here, and I'm going to go here, and now you will see that go further. Okay, I'm going to call go further here. Now you see this one, the two of them are non-static, right? So this one can call this one without a problem. But if I make this static, then I'm going to have a problem. The same. Non-static method go further cannot be referenced from a static context. You see? So I'll leave it as it is just to demonstrate. So now what's going to happen? Let's see how the program is going to execute. Like we said, programs always start from the main method, right? So let's go through the output, try to figure it out in our head, and later we see if we will be able, if the output will be exactly what we figured out. In that way, I'm sure we'll understand better. So our program, when we run this program, the program is made up of all these files. In this case, we're using just demonstrator and Java tutorials. Now, what's happening here? The program starts from the main method. When we run it, it sees the first line, system.out.println, and we pass in main. So the first message will be in main. After that, we create a variable of type demonstrator, and we call it D, and we call the demonstrator constructor to instantiate a demonstrator object, and we store the reference in D. And what happens at this point? Execution. After printing main, we get to this line, execution is directed from main to demonstrator, and the constructor of demonstrator starts executing, and it prints in the constructor. So now at this point, what do we have? We have in main and in the constructor printed out on the screen in that sequence. And then our program continues execution till it meets this empty space. It continues from there, and now it uses the reference variable and it calls the go there method of the demonstration class. So execution goes back to demonstration class and to the go there method. Now when it enters the go there method, what happens? We are here. Go there calls another method, go further. Now execution leaves here and jumps directly to go further. Now go further brings far away on the screen, and then it hits this closing curly brace, and the go further method has finished execution. After that, it returns control to the caller, to its caller, which is go there. Now, after execution is returned to go there continues execution by printing go there on the screen, and then it hits the closing curly brace of go there, and then go there finishes, and then go there returns execution to the main method in the Java tutorials class, which called it immediately, and execution now is back in main, and then main prints back in main, and then main goes further to print main is complete, and then it hits the closing curly brace. After all these empty lines, it hits the closing curly brace and our program executes. So you will see that this would not be executed because it is not called anywhere in the program. Let me run this now and we see what happens. Okay, our program has finished executing, and like we said, program starts from main. It gets in here, in main, it prints out in main. It calls the constructor, it initializes a demonstrator object, and by doing that, it calls the constructor to initialize the object, and you see the constructor executes in the constructor, and we have the output here. Now, after the constructor finishes executing, control is returned back to our main method, and main method continues from there. Main method uses the object that was stored in D, the object reference that was stored in D, to call the go there method on demonstrator, and what happens? Control goes back to the demonstrator class here. But at this point, what happens? Go there calls another method, go further, and execution jumps to this point, and then go further executes, and we see far away on the screen, and then it hits the curly brace, and control is returned back to go there, and then execution continues from there, and go there prints there on the console, which is what we see down here, and then it hits the closing curly brace, and that is the end of the go there method. So it returns execution back to its caller, which is found in the Java tutorials class, and the caller is main. Main continues execution by printing back in main, and we see that here, and then it prints main is complete, and that's what we have here, and it hits the curly brace and our program stops. So you see, since this one is never called, it's never executed. Now I'm just going to come back up here. I'm going to make this static so that my main can call it. I don't want to create an object of this class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this method O. I'm just going to come here and I'm going to click Control. I'll type non-static. Fine, I have it there. Now let's see what's going to happen. Take a guess. You should be able to tell me what's going to be the first statement. Okay, after assuming, I assume you've guessed right, so I'm going to run the program again, and let's see what happens. Now you see, this program, this is the first line of the code. This is the first output that we have. This is a non-static method. Well, it's actually a static method. So what happens here? Since the method has now been declared static, we are calling it inside here without needing an instance of the class, and you will see that it's the first thing to be printed on the screen, and execution continues. If we put it in the middle here, for example, you would see that main will be printed, demonstrator, the constructor, in the constructor, the message in the constructor here will be printed first before that one. So let me run it again. Now you see it shifts. So execution actually revolves around our main method, and we can use that to call different parts of our program. But we should always remember our program will always start from here and end here unless something happens and the program crashes unexpectedly. Well, as we go along the line, we'll see more of that. But try to go over this and practice more. And like I said, we will revisit program execution flow when we talk about packages and imports, and when we talk about the static keyword, and we would still revisit it when we talk about inheritance. All right.